Hi everyone and welcome back to Operation Occupation. Today we're going to talk about brushing teeth. This is an activity that we all need to do for our health and our oral hygiene. It also provides us with a signal that our day has started, and it's often one of the first things we do each day and the last thing we do at night. As always, we need to break this activity down and think about all of the steps involved. So often with toothbrushing, because it's something that we do every day, there are obvious parts of the activity that someone is able to do and obvious parts of the activity that they might not be able to do at present. So initially we're going to focus on the aspects of the activity that the person likes to do or already does and slowly increase their independence or tolerance of the other steps in the activity. We need to ensure that we make a plan, and we're going to be very realistic with this. So this activity involves lots of steps, so we may just choose one step to focus on first. Obviously for this activity we just need three basic things. So we need a toothbrush, toothpaste and access to water. The person that you're working with may also use mouthwash or floss after they've brushed their teeth, but for the purpose of this presentation we're just going to focus on the main part of the activity, the toothbrushing itself. Next, we need to think about the aids that may further support independence. So first, we're going to think about the toothbrush itself. What type of toothbrush does the person currently use, and is it easy for them to hold? There are lots of adapted toothbrushes available, which may be easier. If the person is going to be brushing teeth on their own, is there a particular toothbrush that might maximize cleaning? So for instance, a two-sided toothbrush might make it easier to reach all parts of the teeth. We also need to consider the person's sensory needs. So because toothbrushing is such a sensory experience, often it can be quite difficult for people to tolerate. We need to look at their toothbrush and see if they like the feel of it. Would they prefer a vibrating toothbrush or a finger toothbrush? As always, we've made a list of aids and tools and equipment on the Operation Occupation folder on the CT Library, where you'll also find a list of suppliers and where you can purchase these. Next, we need to consider the type of toothpaste that we use. So first of all, we're going to think about the person's preference in terms of flavour, colour and texture. If the person does not like a mint flavoured toothpaste, then we can look at alternative flavours, and there's lots of these available online. There's also flavourless toothpaste available, which is really useful and has worked really well for people. If a person is presenting with significant sensory needs and isn't tolerating toothbrushing at all, we may initially think about brushing teeth without any toothpaste, but it's worth linking in with your OT around this. Then we need to think about the container. So if the person is going to be doing this part of the activity themselves, where they're squeezing the toothpaste onto the brush, what container would be easiest for them to use, and would they benefit from maybe a tube squeezer or another piece of equipment to support this? And again, all of this is available on the CT Library. Then we're going to think about the environment that we carry out the activity in. It's really important to have a calm environment. This is quite an invasive activity, so it's really, really important that the environment is calm and the person knows they have as much time as they need. It's also really useful to have access to a mirror for people. So often we find it very difficult to process what's happening in our mouth, and a mirror can aid this understanding and reduce stress because we can see it. We also need to consider the room that we do toothbrushing in. So has the person had a bad experience with toothbrushing before? Is it an activity that they don't like? If that's the case, then we don't want to return to the place that this experience happened. Can it be done maybe in the bedroom initially with some water and a bowl? Or can we just change the environment a little bit? Also, we need to think about the physical environment and the accessibility of that. So if the person is a wheelchair user, is the sink at the right height? Can they get close enough to the sink? Can they reach the tap, or can they use the taps easily? Do we need to use some tap turners? Or you might need to think about the person's standing tolerance. So is it hard for the person to remain standing for such a long time? And if that's the case, a perching stool might be something that we could consider. Again, we're going to need to consider the best way to support the person to understand the steps in the task. So on the CT library, we have an example of a visual sequence for this activity, and that is adaptable depending on the person's needs. It's also really important to check the person's communication matrix and consider the supports that usually work to aid understanding. So now on to the good part. Next, we're going to talk about actually doing the activity, and we're going to look at different examples of supports that can be provided depending on a person's needs and the level of assistance they require. So first of all, we're going to look at a person that is independent with aids or setup. In this case, you're thinking about a person that is relatively independent with the task, but need the carer to step in to do maybe one or two parts of the activity. So for instance, that might be squeezing the toothpaste onto the brush or turning on the tap. If we can substitute the carer's input with a tool or a piece of equipment, then that means that the person can be independent with the activity once it is set up for them. So as you can see in these pictures, that might be the use of a perching stool, it might be having a tube squeezer in place, or it might be having tap turners in place. There's also lots of other ideas that you might be able to think of. Now we're going to think about a person that requires supervision support. So again, this person may be independent with the task, or they may be independent with aids and setup in terms of actually doing the task, but they might require supervision for other reasons. So some of those reasons include maybe verbal prompts to move on to the next stage of the activity, or to reduce the amount of toothpaste they're putting on the brush, for instance. But as always with verbal prompts, your aim is to gradually phase those out and use visual prompts instead. It also may be that supervision is required for safety or for time checking. So to remind the person to brush their teeth for longer, or not to spend so long brushing their teeth. And again, you can gradually phase out the verbal time check and use a timer with the person instead. So here we have a person that requires minimal assistance with the activity. So again, the person can carry out most of the activity themselves, but they may need support from the carer or support worker to do one or two steps in the activity. So in this example, the carer is helping the person to put toothpaste on the toothbrush, and they're turning on the tap for the person. In this example, we're looking at a person that requires moderate assistance. So this is where the person can be part of most of the steps of the activity or some of the steps in the activity, but they require much more assistance from the carer than in the previous example. As you can see in these pictures, this carer is using hand-over-hand assistance. So that might be to squeeze the toothpaste onto the tube, or hand-over-hand assistance to hold the brush under the water. It could also be used to support the person to brush their front teeth, and then the carer might independently do the rest of the teeth to ensure it's done correctly. There are lots of different ways to involve the person in the activity, and it's important to try and figure those out with the person. And finally, we're going to talk about a person that requires maximum assistance. So when a person requires maximum assistance, they require a lot of support to engage in the task, but there's still lots of ways that they can be involved in that activity. So for instance, they can hold the toothbrush and the toothpaste, or they can stabilize the toothbrush while the carer squeezes the toothpaste on. They could be involved in the task by using hand-over-hand assistance to rinse the toothbrush each time it needs to be cleaned. As you can see here, we have some examples of how the activity can be carried out in a different environment and in a different way. So if the bathroom environment or the sink is inaccessible to the person, or if it's inhibiting the person from being a part of the activity, then it can be moved away from there and carried out differently. In one example here, you can see that the person is using a bowl, their toothbrush and toothpaste, and an iPad using the selfie camera as a mirror. This is just one way of carrying out the activity differently, but it allows the person to be involved. So that's where we're going to finish up in regards to toothbrushing. But if you have any questions or queries in relation to this activity or any other activity, please don't hesitate to contact the OT department and we can help you out.